President, I would request Pratik Bhai Patel to run the motto song of Tax Advocate Association, a precedent which we follow in all our webinars, sir.
ज्ञानं परमं बलम् विद्येव बलम् ज्ञानम् अनन्तम् ज्ञानं परमं ध्येयम् सा विद्याय विमुक्तये विद्यदति विनयम् सा विद्याय विमुक्तये नहि ज्ञानेन सदृशम्
Thank you, Pratik Bhai. Now I would request PK Soni sir, President of the Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, to give his welcome speech. Soni sir.
Respected Sri Arvind Datar sir, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court, dignitaries of both the associations and fellow participants. It is indeed a great pleasure and proud for our association, both the association, that Sri Arvind Datar sir has kindly consented to deliver a speech on constitutional aspect and taxation on the digital platform. Sir, our association, Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, is comprising of advocates, chartered accountants, and GST practitioners, and was established in the year 1954, having individual members around 2000 and 19 associate members, and having total strength of 5,000 members. Our association is also publishing monthly Celtex journal since 1962, distributing the 1500 copies every month, publishing latest amendment articles and eminent speaker writers, the tax related information, etc. I heartily welcome Sri Datar sir on this platform and hope that all the participants, members will be benefited by his thought-provoking speech. Thank you. Welcome, all, Datar sir.
Thank you, PK Soni sir. Good afternoon, friends. Eminent speaker of the day, Shri Arvind Datar sir, Senior Advocate, Supreme Court of India. President of GSTBA, PK Soni sir. Convener, Study Circle of Tax Advocate Association, Varis Isani ji. Seniors and friends, I welcome you all friends in today's discussion, the constitutional aspects and taxation. Friends, we all practice tax laws, and largely the practice, or I would say, deals with or it is restricted to the tax laws. However, the genesis of all the laws, whether it is tax law or otherwise, is the Constitution of India. It is very important and paramount to know and understand the articles from which these tax laws have come into existence. Also important is to ascertain whether these tax laws satisfy the basic founding principles of the Constitution of India. And if these tax laws violate or fall short, then what is the remedy available or enshrined in the Constitution of India? Friends, compared to the income tax, GST law is a very new law, and unlike income tax, we come across various provisions, rules, circulars, and notifications which fail the test of constitutional principles and precedents. So we thought, the both associations, we thought that it is very important to hold a webinar on key constitutional aspects relating to the tax laws. We are very fortunate to have a doyen of legal profession, Shri Arvind Datar sir, who has readily accepted our invitation and agreed to share his knowledge among members of both the associations. If I am not mistaken, Shri Arvind Datar sir was one of the very few members or one of the very few persons across the country who raised red flags regarding various provisions of GST law much before 1st of July 2017 when it was actually rolled out. I'm sure he might be having a keen eye on all the actions taken by the legislation and the administration since then to overcome or to undo the damage which has already been done, and whether these actions would in fact result in the law being settling down. I'm sure that this would be a very resourceful deliberation. I once again welcome all the participants. I once again welcome eminent speaker of the day, Arvind Datar sir. Now I would request Varis Isani sir, convener of Tax Advocate Association, to take charge of the proceedings further, sir. Varis Isani sir.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to everyone. Today's learned speaker, Shri Arvind Datar sir, President of the Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, Shri P.K. Soni sir, President of the Tax Advocate Association, Gujarat, Shri Sunil Bhai Keshwani, Secretary of the Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, Shri Udayan Bhai Modi and Shantilal Thakkarji, Secretary of the Tax Advocate Association, Gujarat, Pratik Bhai, other office bearers, dignitaries and participants. It is indeed an honor for both the association that today we have amongst us a very learned legal personality of our country, a very senior advocate, Shri Arvind P. Datar sir, who is a senior advocate in the Supreme Court and a cost and works accountant, practices in the Supreme Court as well as in the various high courts also. Shri Arvind Datar sir has also appeared in a bilateral investment treaty arbitration which was held at the International Court of Justice, The Hague. Apart from his practice, he is the author of several commentaries and books on the subject of Guide to Central Excise, Guide to Central Excise and Procedures, commentary on the Constitution of India, and Nani Palkhiwala, the Courtroom Genesis. He is also the chief editor of Kanga and Palkhiwala, the Law and Practice of Income Tax. He is editor-in-chief of Romania's Guide to the Companies Act and the general editor of the recently published Essays and Reminiscences. A franchisee is the owner of Nani and Palkhiwala. He has written over 300 articles in various newspapers, journals, and periodicals. He has been a visiting faculty at several institutions and at the National Judicial Academy, Bhopal. He is the founder trustee of the Palkhiwala Foundations and a founder directors of the Nani Palkhiwala Arbitration Center. He was the former joint secretary of the Tamil Nadu Mediation Center, Madras High Court. Friends, we are indeed lucky to have this legal personality and stalwarts of the Supreme Court who is going to deliver on the subject of the constitutional aspects and the taxation. Originally, Sir's lecture was scheduled in the month of September, but as he was busy in writing the books on this particular subject and topic only, the Sir has requested to arrange this and reschedule this topic and the lecture today in October. So both the association have readily accepted, and one more thing, only on telephonic invitation and only the invitation through email. Today's speaker has accepted our invitation and we are lucky to have you, sir, with us. Sir, as this being the period of the COVID-19, so we would like to give you a virtual welcome with the virtual flowers, sir. And I would like to request our Secretary of the Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, Shantilal Thakkarji, to give a floral welcome with the virtual flower to our today's eminent speaker, Shri Arvind Datarji, sir. Sir, our feeling and fragrance are really in the natural things. It is not a virtual, sir. I would like to also request the Vice President of the Gujarat Sales Tax Bar Association, Shri N.N. Patel, sir, to present and offer a memento, again a virtual memento to our today's speaker, Shri Arvind Datar ji, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, now floor is yours, sir. Arvind Datar, sir, please.
Yes, can all of you hear me now? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. First of all, let me thank both the associations for inviting me to speak at the webinar. It is 6 months ago, if somebody had said I'll be addressing webinars in different parts of the country and appearing in different high courts, sitting in this office of mine in Chennai, I would have said that I would not have believed what has happened. So I think our entire world has gone upside down. In a sense, this virtual hearing, I think, we can take advantage of it. There are definitely positives. We save time on travel. We are able to do much more productive work in this. I must thank you for the virtual welcome, the virtual flowers. I can assure you that I felt the virtual fragrance in Chennai. And thanks also for the virtual momentum. I must apologize for the adjournment or the delay in the seminar. It was supposed to be, I think, in end of August or beginning September. But I'm actually very busy finishing the final touches to my third edition of the Constitution. It's already delayed by several years because I had to write 2-3 books in between. And somehow it got delayed. But then I could not say no to Mr. Isani again. I said, since I was doing this Constitution work in any case, I finished the Kanka Palkiwala during this pandemic, March, April, May. I'd done the whole thing in December, but the publisher said that the budget is coming in January. So if you release the book in January and the budget comes after 15 days, then the sales will be affected. So we had to wait till the budget came on 23rd or 24th of March, then cover the cases which came from January to March, and then the book was released in May. So that was a big blessing for the pandemic because in the initial lockdown, I could get a lot of free time to complete the book. I hope all of you like the new edition which we have done. Yes, if there are any suggestions, please let me know. Now coming to the topic, I said that all of us are practicing tax on a day-to-day basis. But I thought that at the request of Mr. Isani, I thought I will speak on the constitutional aspects of taxation. And I thought I'll share my lecture with 7 slides. So what I propose to do is to give you some of my experiences, and these can be hopefully helpful in our day-to-day practice. I propose to just give you first for a few minutes a broad outline of what this is, then go into the other aspects of the Constitution. And since Mr. Isani mentioned about the investment treaty arbitration, if you're interested, I will briefly tell you what this investment treaty arbitration is all about, which I had the occasion to participate for 15 continuous days at The Hague. I'll do that towards the end if time permits. Now, what we should do is our interaction with the Constitution as advocates is basically Article 226. We either challenge a show cause notice, or we challenge a 147 reassessment, or we challenge a sales tax proceeding or a GST proceeding under 226. But the Constitution is much more than that. And when we see the Constitution, as Mr. Soni himself mentioned, that everything has to originate in a Constitution. In India, there is no monarchy, it's a republic. And the thing which is most supreme is the Constitution. And under the Constitution, you have the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. Now, within the Constitution, if you see the initial topic, in initial debates, in fact, I'm doing one of the arguments in the Sabrimala case, and we are discussing an issue of constitutional morality. And while I was researching the speeches in the Constituent Assembly, one question was, why is our Constitution so long? Why do we have such a lengthy Constitution and not a shorter Constitution? And there's a very nice speech of Dr. Ambedkar which is relevant to our topic. He says that if you go to the older constitution like the US done 200 years ago, it's a very short constitution. We'll have liberty, we'll have freedom, we'll have this. But Dr. Ambedkar and the other assembly members said that, look, India is a diverse country. We have At that time, there were more than 555 princely states. They had merged into the British India, different languages, different cultures, and so on. So he thought that it is better to precisely set out provisions of the Constitution, so there is less scope for judicial interpretation, and not have elastic concepts like due process, reasonableness, which can just go out of control. So one of the provisions was that we had a detailed constitution. It was a decision taken by Dr. Ambedkar, and then the assembly supported him, that let us have a very, very detailed constitution. It will be on the British parliamentary model. They'll have a lower house like Lok Sabha. They'll have an upper house like Rajya Sabha. You'll have a president who will be like a king or a queen, like a figurative head. There'll be governors, and that's how. And one important point was they had detailed provisions on taxation. It was not left to the thing. The other point you will remember is 80% of our constitution is the Government of India Act of 1935. You take the Government of India Act of 1935, add fundamental rights, add directive principles, add a few sections, and you get the Constitution of India. But there are important changes made. Now, in the Constitution, we have a federal system. I'll come to GST later, but we have a federal system where there are some exclusive powers given to the union, to the states, and one very important point of our constitution which you must note is that there is not a single taxation provision in the concurrent list. Not a single. And if you go to list 1, entry 82 is tax on income, 83 is customs, 84 excise. So it goes on, and you finally come to 92B. Actually, it should be 92C, which was service tax, which was dropped. So it was up to 92C. These are the provisions in the union list. In the state list, you have entry 44 to 62. So 49 is tax on land and buildings. Entry 62 is tax on luxuries. Now, please note that many of these entries have been substantially changed because of GST, because all the indirect taxes have been subsumed into the GST. But the point I'm making is, our system says these are the taxes can be levied by the union, these by the states, and none by the concurrent list. No government can lay both the taxes at the same time. This was the law till GST came, which I'll come to later. Now, the unique feature of our constitution, see, whether you take Sales Tax Act or Income Tax Act, you normally have the definition section in the beginning. A very unique feature of our constitution is our definition section is in Article 366. It's almost towards the end of the constitution. So I was wondering, why is it? What is the logic? Why wasn't Article 2, like, most of the, whether it's a sales tax or a GST, definition section is 2. First is the short title, second is definition, then the whole charging section starts. The only answer I could find was in the Government of India Act 1935, section 311 was the definition section. It was towards the end. So maybe they simply borrowed the same thing and kept it in the Article 3. I remember the direct taxes code also, which dropped. That also definition was towards the end. But these are the important definitions. 366(1) is agricultural income, and so on and so forth. I'm not getting into details, but these are the important definition sections which you should read if you get time. Now, there are a number of provisions relating to taxation, but I've set out 265, which is important. No tax can be levied except with the authority of law. And law means parliamentary law. It can't be by means of a notification or a circular or something, unless expressly delegated. The other important article to note is 286, which is relevant for sales tax. Those of you who are practicing in sales tax will know the importance of 286. And of course, 304. In 304, let me tell you that I was one of the people who argued the Jindal matter. We lost substantially. And now the Supreme Court says that, I don't agree with the view. The Supreme Court says that taxation is not involved in Part 13 at all. Interstate commerce has nothing to do with taxation, which I think is not correct, because the Part 13, 301, 302 says no law. Law can be tax law also. Why it should be excluded tax law? There is no logic. But today, as far as Article 304 is concerned, what it says is between two states, there can be no discriminatory tax. Tamil Nadu cannot say I will tax goods made in Chennai at 14% and goods from Gujarat coming at 18%. That's the only ground which is not permitted under Article 304. Otherwise, interstate trade and commerce now is completely eliminated from tax. Now go to the next slide, please. Yeah. The most important part of our taxation thing is that there is no overlapping of tax. And this is a continuous problem we had ever since service tax came into being. You will have on the same transaction service tax levied and also VAT being levied. Again and again, we had this multiple problem of overlapping. Why do I say there is no overlapping? If you take Searwise book, and which has been followed in Godfrey Phillips, if you want to note, you can note Godfrey Phillips is 2005, 2 SEC 515, a very important judgment on the overlapping of taxes. You can't have the same transaction subject to two taxes. Now, a common example is the overlapping between service tax and VAT. Take for example our internet, Tata Sky or this thing. You have entertainment tax on that. On the same amount of payment, there is a dispute pending in the Supreme Court whether VAT can be levied by different states. So I pay 500 rupees per month for a package for various channels. I pay entertainment tax on that. I'm also paying VAT on that. Madras High Court has struck it down. Other high courts have upheld it, but it has gone to Supreme Court. Our point is this: if the what you call internet is a service and I'm paying service tax on that, then that same 500 rupees cannot be subject to entertainment tax again. That's the logic, because it has to come under list 1 or it has to come under list 2. Now, how do you decide whether it's list 1 or list 2? What is the logic? There, the fundamental point is the pith and substance doctrine. What is the real substance of this transaction? If I'm levying tax on the internet or the what is called this cable TV or your channel cable TV or I don't watch much TV, so I don't know, but this cable TV or Tata Sky or Bharti Airtel, etc. It's a service, and therefore it will be liable only to service tax. Now, once it has become liable to service tax, you can't say there's also entertainment and tax it on that. Now, that is the question of pith and substance. You must find out what is the nature of this tax. In the Karnataka High Court, we succeeded. Software development, it's coming as service tax under 65105 ZZZZE. It's a computer development of software as a service. The Karnataka VAT Act in the schedule said computer software is also subject to VAT. Then we succeeded that saying that if it is subject to service tax and it's a service, the High Court cannot be, Karnataka government or the state legislature cannot again make it into a, call it sale of goods and make it liable to tax. Those of us who are practicing in sales tax, the provision which is most widely abused is this transfer of right to use. Anything is taken as transfer of right to use. Now, we are doing a matter in the Supreme Court. All of you know that on the various buildings, we have these cell phone towers. You must have seen these cell phone towers on various buildings. Now, that is a clear telecom service liable to service tax. The sales tax authorities have taken the view that, now before I go into it, the logic was the government said that these telecom towers are called passive infrastructure. Now, there is no reason why there should be one tower for Vodafone, one tower for Idea, one tower for Reliance, one tower for this. So there are two large companies which basically own the towers, and they charge 17,000 rupees a month per tower or 10,000 rupees a month per tower for using that particular tower. So you get a space in that tower and your calls go through from each tower. It's a service, is being paying service tax. The VAT authority said there's a right to use the tower and therefore it comes under VAT. So the same transaction was subject to service tax and subject to VAT. Fortunately, we succeeded in Madhya Pradesh, in Delhi, in Tamil Nadu, in Karnataka. Ironically, the only High Court which held against us was the Gujarat High Court. And that has been stayed by the Supreme Court. Gujarat High Court has said, no, they didn't accept any of the judgment. They said it's a transfer of right to use because each company gets a slot and therefore it's a transfer of right to use, which I thought was a wrong argument. Anyway, it is coming on 6th November before the Supreme Court for final hearing. This is the question of overlapping, and this is a perennial problem. Every time we face this problem of double tax. Fortunately, after 2017, It has gone because there is no separate service tax and no separate VAT. Everything is coming under GST. So that particular problem is gone. Now, how was it got over by that? By the aspect theory. What the Supreme Court said was, now, according to me, I appeared in the Bombay High Court on this issue of professional services. Now, all of us are lawyers, the chartered accountants. If you have got the constitution, you take entry 60 of list 2. Entry 60 of list 2 says tax on profession. Simple. Now, all of us have studied in law college that every entry should be given the widest possible meaning. They should not be given a narrow construction, but a wide construction. So tax on profession will mean tax on practicing the profession, entering the profession. They levied service tax on chartered accountants, architects, and so on. So I argued before the Bombay High Court that, look, a profession is a service. When you say entry 60 talks of tax on profession and states can levy, only state government can levy profession tax. They can't levy on, central government can't levy service tax, because the state can levy a tax on profession. Whether I'm practicing or not practicing, they can levy. They rejected my argument in the High Court and we lost in the Supreme Court. They said tax on profession is enrolling in the bar. But when you practice, it becomes a service. I don't understand the logic at all. Tax on profession should cover everything. If you say it should be covered widely, you can just note a very important judgment of the Supreme Court on how to interpret an entry. I didn't mention it here. It's AIR 1981 SC 774. AIR 81 SC 774. International Tourist Corporation versus State of Haryana. They say, the very nice judgment by Justice Chinnappa Reddy. It is worth listening carefully. He says, take tax on profession. Interpret it widely. Ask yourself the question whether the levy you want to do comes within that particular entry. Now, take for example tax on passengers. It's coming entry 56. So state government can levy tax on passengers. So it can levy tax on a passenger bus. It can levy tax on a passenger going from place A to place B. So if you accept the theory of International Tourist Corporation, if the entry is led widely, my argument is a state government can levy tax on a person who enrolls in the bar and also a person who practices the profession. Both he can do. You can't put aspect theory that service aspect is in this central list and this aspect is in the state list. According to me, this aspect theory, which came out in Federation of Hotels case, 1990 Supreme Court, is completely wrong. It is from Canada. Canada does not have a kind of a concurrent list, but just to inform you that when there's overlapping of taxes, pith and substance is the theory, aspect theory is wrong. But the Supreme Court has said in a profession, service aspect is by central government, other aspect is by state government. In passenger service is central government, and actual passenger, the right to carry passenger, state government. Frankly, I don't understand the logic. I don't think it is correct, but it is a Supreme Court, so you have to accept the subject as it, the law as it is. The last point in state taxes is limits of taxation. And I think the best possible judgment on this power of state to tax is the Gannon-Dunkley case, the first Gannon-Dunkley, AIR 1958 Supreme Court 560. AIR 58 Supreme Court 560. Very interesting. I don't know how many of you know that I think perhaps the first general sales tax in India was Madras General Sales Tax Act 1939, put by Rajagopalachari. Then that became 58 and became the model for other states. Now, what the Madras legislature did when Rajagopalachari was the chief minister, it said sale includes works contract for the first time. That was challenged before the Madras High Court. They held it to be unconstitutional. Went to the Supreme Court, and please take the trouble of reading the Supreme Court judgment in detail, a beautifully written judgment by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, what is your power to tax? Answer is tax on sale or purchase of goods. If you see entry 54 of list 2 before the GST came, it says taxes on sale or profession. Okay. So sorry, sale or purchase of goods. what is sale? Sale is not defined in the Constitution. So the Supreme Court says sale is nomen juris, N-O-M-E-N, juris, means it's got a juristic meaning. And sale means sale as per the Sale of Goods Act. That's how it's been understood throughout. So when the Constitution was formed in 1950, we had the Sale of Goods Act of 1930. So the founders would know that sale means sale as per the Sale of Goods Act. Now the state has got the power to define sale. Sale means transfer of property in goods for consideration. And the most important point the Supreme Court laid down was the state government cannot expand its taxing power by giving artificial meaning to words. It can't say sale means works contract. Sale means right to use. You can't do that. And it was Gannon-Dunkley which ultimately after 30 years led to the 46th Amendment. Then you had works contract, transfer of right to use, leasing tax, tax on food, etc. But this is the judgment which said it's good law even today that the state government cannot expand its taxing powers beyond a particular point. Now let me come to the next point. We file a writ petition to challenge the validity of a law. One is competence and the other is, what is competence? Parliament can't levy a tax which is coming under list 2. State government can't levy a tax which is coming under list 1 because they don't have the legislative competence. State government can only levy tax, if you take the previous slide, in terms of entry 44 to 62 of the Sale of Goods of the list 2. Similarly, Parliament can levy tax only in the union list. It can't come to the state list. So that is the point we are raising. So for example, in the case now pending before 9 judges, tax on minerals. Parliament is levying tax. We say Parliament cannot levy tax. It is a state subject. Right? You take, for example, the issue I just mentioned of telecom towers. State government is levying VAT. We are saying no, it comes under entry 97, which is the residual entry. I forgot to mention this. Apart from the central list, all of us know there is entry 97, which is items not elsewhere specified. So if a tax is not mentioned in list 2, it can be levied under entry 97. So if you ask me where is gift tax, entry 97. Where is wealth tax, entry 97. Where was service tax, entry 97. So whatever can't be fitted in other things will go under entry 97. So the first ground of challenge can be legislative competence, which we are doing in the case of telecom towers. We are saying that state government has no competence. This is a competence issue. Second step is Parliament is competent, state government is competent, no problem. But it is violating Article 14, Article 19(1)(g). That is fundamental rights. And why I said 14, 19(1)(g), we are all tax lawyers. So basically we can only go under 14 or 19. There's no human rights, etc. and what? It's only 14 or 19. Other constitutional limitation. What is the limitation? A notification can't levy a tax because law means primary law. Then under Article 304, interstate trade and commerce, one state cannot discriminate against the other. Then Article 300A, right to property, you can't have confiscatory laws. So these are all the other when you file a writ petition, you must first check, am I challenging on competence? Am I challenging on fundamental rights? Or am I challenging on other constitutional limitation? I'll tell you one interesting case we are doing in the Delhi High Court. Now, all of you know this 43C, right? 43C of the Income Tax Act, which says that the difference between guideline value and the sale price will be deemed to be income, right? I hope all of you know that. Now, the interesting part is, take the case of, say, Delhi. After demonetization, prices fell by 40%. So a flat, say, in Noida or in Gurgaon, which is costing, whose circle rate or the guideline value is 1 crore, was actually not being sold even for 75 lakhs or 70 lakhs. Now, under the Income Tax Act, the difference between the circle rate of 1 crore and your selling price of 70 lakhs is deemed to be your income. I've never earned the income. I know big builders like DLF and Ansar and so on, who had 100, 200 flats, unsold flats, they had to sell at a lower price. the difference is taxed as income. Now look at the double attack. I am DLF, I sell it, so on that 30 lakhs I have to pay tax. Now say Mr. Isani is the buyer. You buy a tax for 1 crore at 70 lakhs. That 30 lakhs is your income under 56. So one ground of challenge is we are taking the plea that entry 82 says tax on income. The point we are arguing before the Delhi High Court, it will come now in January. It was supposed to come now because of the pandemic, it is got postponed. One point we are taking is that tax on income means it has to be tax on real income. It can't be something artificial, something notional, something which never exists. If the circle rate is made 1 crore and 10 lakhs and I am selling it at 80 lakhs, complete white, nothing wrong, you can't levy tax on 30 lakhs as income. I have never earned that income. Similarly, as a upper middle class or a person, I buy the flat, why should I pay tax on 30 lakhs? So that we're challenging. In case you want to know the judgment, it is Navneet Lal, AIR 65 Supreme Court 1375, which says that tax on income means it must be taxed on a real income, something which a person can call income. It can be capital gains, it can be revenue account, but it has to be something which is income. It can't be something which is fictitious, completely imaginary and so on. So that is one interesting point which we are arguing. Now, delegated legislation. You can have delegated legislation is challenging a board circular, challenging a notification, challenging a other guideline or any kind of instruction, public notice. This is delegated legislation. Apart from the challenges mentioned in item 5, competence, part 3, etc., delegated legislation has another point. It can't violate the parent statute. The act cannot go against its own mother statute. And of course, basic structure, though basic structure applies to constitution, we succeeded, I appeared to be struck down the National Tax Tribunal Act, saying that the entity is also violative of basic structure. Let's go to the next slide. Now, in constitutional remedies, I said the points I mentioned can all be used in Article 32 and 226. Please note that 32 is only for fundamental rights. 226 is much wider. It's for any other purpose. It is fundamental rights for any other. So 226 is much more wide. Then reading down. Suppose I want to strike down a legislation. The law is courts as far as possible will try to uphold the parliamentary law. They will not strike it down. But the law says that instead of striking it down, you can read it down. You can reduce the rigor of the law and say no. For example, in this case of, I said about the DLF where the difference between circle rate and this rate is being taxed. They can strike down 43CA, or they can say that where the SSC can establish that it is a market value, that a difference need not be paid. So they can read it down and reduce the rigor of the law. I personally prefer it to be struck down because reading it down, then the judiciary is amending the law, which is not the function of the judiciary. In my opinion, reading down should be done very, very rarely. If the law is bad, strike it down. It's for Parliament to redraft it. And rules and circulars, same thing. I said delegate legislation. Now, the biggest problem we face is show cause notices. 147. How do you challenge it? Now, the most important thing is under 147 or under sales tax or under GST, lack of jurisdiction. We had a very interesting case where there was a merger between two telecom companies, Andhra company, Karnataka company and Tamil Nadu company all merged. Andhra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, 4 southern companies had a merger and it became headquartered in Chennai. Now the sales tax department said that there is a sale of these towers. All the other companies, there is a sale and they demanded some 300-400 crores. One point we took bad was we said that where the towers are in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka, Tamil Nadu government has no right to tax because the goods must be in your state. That is a requirement of the law. So jurisdiction was taken up Because you see, the moment you go on a show cause notice, they now say, no, alternate remedy, you go and appear before the officer. Of course, alternate remedy, all of us know is only theory. There is no remedy. In fact, I told one judge, I said, if you show me 147, even if 5% cases are dropped, I will accept defeat. But to my knowledge, every case is just a formality. Every excise notice is simply blindly confirmed. In any sales tax proceeding, it is simply blindly confirmed. It's only in the tribunal or in the high court you get relief. But that's a fact, we can't run away from it. Then jurisdictional fact. To levy tax, you must have a jurisdictional fact. I'll give an example which is now pending again in the Supreme Court. There is a large power project. Look at how the arbitrary way the department works. There's a mega power project in Punjab. 9,000 or 11,000 crores is the total cost of the project. The goods have come in Kandla port and have traveled from Kandla to Punjab. The officer has issued a C form and they have paid tax. Now the same officer later, he says delivery took place and I think the transfer of property took place in Punjab. On the same transaction is demanded again sales tax. So we are taking the question of jurisdictional fact. You can't assume sale has taken place. When you yourself have issued a C form and said the goods have come from Kandla to Punjab, how can you assume it is a case? Because the other difficulty in sales tax is that if the order goes against you, the pre-deposit, I don't know what's the rate in Gujarat, but in Chennai it's 50% at the first stage, 100% at the next stage. Then of course you have a violation of Article 14, arbitrariness. Go to the next one. Yes, the types of writs are mandamus. This applies typically in refund cases where you ask the court to issue a mandamus, ask the officer to do a duty and challenge it. Certiorari is to quash a notice. Now one writ which is not used, which I would recommend you to examine, is the writ of prohibition. Suppose the officer has no jurisdiction and he issues a show cause notice. One option is to quash the show cause notice. But I personally prefer, if it is a case without jurisdiction, I ask for a writ of prohibition. I said, prohibit him from proceeding further with the notice. He cannot proceed with the notice. And for that, I give him two important judgments. And the second judgment is very important, Bengal immunity. The paragraph I've given, though it's a minority part of the judgment, it says for certiorari, alternate remedy is relevant. For prohibition, alternate remedy is not relevant at all. Because you're saying you have no jurisdiction to demand a tax. So, in a case where people have demanded, a demand is made without any jurisdiction whatsoever, very often I prefer to go under a prohibition. Now, alternate remedy, whenever I've argued the case for a 147 reopening, one case always thrown at me is Chabildas. All of you must have seen this Chabildas case. It's a favorite case from the department. They'll say, no, Chabildas. But I want you to read the judgment at your leisure. It was a case where a person was a lottery ticket person. He never replied to the notice. It was a 144 best judgment assessment. On that, subsequently, it was reopening was issued and so on. So that case has no application. Alternate remedy, we'll have to show that if it's no remedy at all, if there is no jurisdiction, then alternate remedy should not be a bar. Unfortunately, many judges simply reject a writ petition saying alternate remedy without really going into the facts. All of you doing 147, you have to go by GK and drive shafts. He issues a 147 reopening, and the very funny thing in income tax, unlike excise and sales taxes, no reasons are given for reopening. He simply says, I'm reopening. Then you ask for reasons, he gives reasons, and invariably it is confirmed. So this Chabildas case, you have to get over if you can. Next slide. Yes. Now I want to explain to you two things. People have often asked me this, so I thought it may interest you. What is the difference between a retrospective law and a retroactive law? What is the difference? I did a good amount of research, and there is a scholar in England called Ben Juratovich. His PhD thesis has come in the form of a book. And the biggest development in the law is from Canada, on what is retrospective law and retroactive law. And I will explain by means of an example. See if you can follow it. If there are any doubts, you can ask me when I finish. First, let me see what is retrospective. Let me say, suppose you're a chartered accountant. You're a chartered accountant. Today you have to pay service tax at 12%. Now, the Finance Act says all chartered accountants or all professionals will pay service tax from 2017, hypothetically, or will pay GST at from 2017 at 24%. So what has happened? The rate of GST has gone up from 12% to 24% from 2017. There is no change in fact, there is nothing. It's just that from 2017, the rate of tax has been increased. Second type of retrospective is Companies Act 2013 says that any person who has been convicted of an offense for more than 6 months cannot be a director. So it's a disqualification. If you are convicted for more than 6 months, you can't be a director. Now what happens? The law has come in 2013, but your conviction may have been in 2009, 2010. So even though the conviction was before, you can't be a director in future. So this is a retrospective operation of the law. The first is the law itself is retrospective. I will charge you duty from 2017 at 24%. Secondly, what they say is from 2013, you can't be a director. Who can't be a director? Anybody who has been convicted for more than 6 months. So on earlier facts, the law comes. This is not classically retrospective, but on earlier facts, the new disabilities start. Now I'll come to this difficult thing of retroactive, and unfortunately no Supreme Court in India has explained it. Only when I studied this and we use it in the investment arbitration, we learned about it. What is retroactive law? Now, all of us know that there is no service tax, there is no GST on advocates, right? Whatever service we do on the RCM or reverse charge mechanism, the client pays the tax. Now listen to this carefully. Suppose in Finance Act 2021, they say GST will be levied on advocates from 2017, and all advocates shall be deemed to be chartered accountants from 2017. What has happened is the facts have completely changed. You're a lawyer from beginning, but you're deemed to be a lawyer deemed to be a chartered accountant from 2017. The factual situation has changed. It's a retroactive law. Let me give another easier example. All of you have heard of Vodafone, right? What happened in Vodafone? One share in Cayman Island was sold from a Hong Kong company to a Dutch company, right? That share was sold for $11 billion. Hong Kong company owned that share. It sold to a Dutch subsidiary of Vodafone. So, where was the share? Outside India. Which company? Cayman Island company. What's the situs of the share? Site of the share is a foreign share. It's not an Indian share. Now the argument was, though the share is a foreign share, where are all the assets? Assets are in India. All the telecom assets are in India. It may be a Mauritius company, but all the business is done in India. So the underlying assets are in India, but the holding companies abroad. Now, what they did after what the Supreme Court held, Supreme Court said, when you transfer a share, you don't transfer the assets. If I buy 35% of Tata Motors, suppose I purchase 35% of Tata Motors, I don't buy 35% of the Pune plant, 35% of the Jamshedpur factory, 35% of the Bhilai factory. I just buy 35% of the share capital of Tata Motors. I don't buy underlying assets. Now, how was the Vodafone Amendment retroactive? Explanation 5 to 911. Why is it retroactive? It is retroactive because what it says from 1/4/1962 if the share is a foreign share, but its value is from underlying value of the assets are in India, that is, it derives substantial value from assets in India, it is deemed to be situated in India. So foreign share becomes an Indian share and you tax it. Now, why did Vodafone, they lose the case recently? When Vodafone transferred the share in 2007, what was transferred? A share was transferred, a foreign share, a share situated in Cayman Islands was transferred. In 2012, you make a retroactive amendment and say the Cayman Island share shall be deemed to be an Indian share and tax it. So the basic difference in retroactive taxation is, you can note, is that retroactive taxation involves changing the fact situation. You alter the facts. You not only make the law operative retrospectively, you change the facts. You make a lawyer into a chartered accountant. You make a foreign share into an Indian share, and then you levy tax. So this is on retrospective and retroactive. Now I'm running out of time, but one major problem which is going to come in the Supreme Court now is extraterritorial operation in the light of equalization levy, in the light of other provisions. Now, amendments in India, see now in international taxation, I'm going to international taxation. In international taxation, any country can tax income which either arises in that country or if the person is resident in that country. So if I'm resident in India, I can have German income, I'm taxed in India. I can have Japanese income, I'm taxed in India. Similarly, if the Japanese company earns income in India, it is taxed in India. So source theory, source basis, residence basis. Now you have got, if you see explanation 2 to 195 of the Income Tax Act, see the explanation to section 917 of the Income Tax Act, what it says, even if both parties are non-resident, India can tax. Even if there is no connection to India, India can tax. Now, a big question will come to Supreme Court next year is it permissible for Indian Parliament to levy tax on a transaction which is outside its borders? And what does equalization levy say? I don't know how many of you have seen equalization levy. To give an example, suppose I purchase, let us say from Amazon, I purchase an Apple laptop from US and ask it to deliver in India. So an Indian buyer buys a laptop in Amazon, New York for $1,000. Now I pay $1,000 to Amazon. Amazon will get it from Apple at say $900. Okay, so $100 is the commission of Amazon. Now the equalization levy says if there's an e-commerce operator, an e-commerce supplier of goods and services, then whatever is the consideration received by the e-commerce operator will be taxed in India. So Amazon, which will get $100 commission from Apple in the US, sale is taking place in the US, then supplied to India, India can tax 2%. Now, can we do it? Some profit is earned there. Look at the logic. Suppose Ulta, look at the Ulta situation. Suppose a Gujarati lady in US places wholesale orders for saris, say from Kanjivaram silk saris from Chennai, through an e-commerce operator, an e-commerce supplier. And $100,000 of saris are supplied there, for she's going to sell it there and make a business. Now, the e-commerce operator in India will get the saris from the sari person and send it to US. So the e-commerce operator earns his commission. Can you imagine the US company saying, India, you now pay the man in Chennai, pay US tax, file US return. That is the equalization levy. Now, can the Indian government do that? Article 245 says law can be extraterritorial, but there is a big difference between extraterritorial operation and extraterritorial legislation. That's also discussed in Bengal immunity case, but there is no time. So this is the next area which you have to now cover. How far can one country tax income arising under the other country? That is a big situation which you have to do. Next slide, please. Yeah, GST. The unique feature of GST is this is the first concurrent tax in Indian history. biggest tax reform. Of course, as somebody said, I have criticized it. I also got a lot of, I mean, I always maintain that for a large country like India, GST is not suitable. What is good for Jharkhand is not good for Tamil Nadu, and what's good for Maharashtra. It's difficult to maintain. You don't have the bandwidth anyway, but so they say it's a good and simple tax. As the events have turned out, it has not turned out to be good or simple. You see, because what has ultimately happened is it is excise plus service tax plus VAT all put to as a merger, and you call it GST. And I don't want to waste time. All of you know it has not been simple. There have been repeated circular notification. It's like the old regime. Recently, we challenged the GST tribunal. We succeeded in the Madras High Court. Section 109, 110 was struck down. That's still not gone to the Supreme Court. But today, for today's lecture, I can only say the GST is a unique tax. It's a great achievement of federal cooperative federalism, where states have surrendered their taxing power, given up sales tax, given up entertainment tax, given up entry tax, and said we'll all go by GST. Any invoice you say 18%, 9% CGST, 9% CGST. All our bills will say 9% CGST, 9% SGST. So that's the way the taxes are going. The GST Council, it's recommendatory. Now, my difficulty or my worry is 246A says Parliament and any state legislature can levy GST. The GST Council is only recommendatory, it's not binding. After the GST compensation cess problem, suppose one state decides, no, I'll give my own GST. Can you stop it? According to me, you cannot. Fortunately, all the states have behaved responsibly. Nothing has happened. But if this GST compensation cess, if it is not sorted out, it could lead to problems. In fact, I just wanted to write an article on that, but then just now, I think the finance minister said that they will settle the GST compensation cess issue. But once the government has promised the compensation, it should have paid it. Next. Yes. I'll answer question and answer afterwards. So just bear with me. Yes. Now, I just wanted to set out the important cases. I just thought some interesting cases. It's a slide so you can see it. It's available with you. On alternate remedy, if any alternate remedy is questioned, you can use these cases. Oryx Fisheries and Seamen says if the notice is with full meditation, if they already made up their mind and nothing further remains, then alternate remedy should not be a bar. In jurisdiction, please read Raza Textile's very good judgment. You can't assume a fact. Like in my case, you can't say something is a service and I will levy service tax. No. You have to, jurisdictional fact cannot be assumed. Retrospectivity, Vatika Township and JM and Company. Now, I think this is the last slide. I only wanted to just mention about investment treaty arbitration. What is this investment treaty arbitration? What happened to Vodafone? And the other case which I have put, which is pending. What is there? You see, we have signed bilateral investment treaty. It's called BITS, BIT, bilateral investment treaty. Let's take India and UK. Indian government signs a treaty with UK government for protection of investments. It's a bilateral investment treaty. Today, India, say Tata Motors, say Tatas have acquired Chorus Steel. Mittal has acquired some steel plant in England. So Indian money, hypothetically, has been invested in England. In the reverse situation, English investments have come to India. British Petroleum, British Gas, Vodafone, Kane, etc. Now, what both countries agree is that we will make sure, this is the most important, there are only two important clauses in a BIT, Article 3 and Article 5. Article 3 says, each country shall give fair and equitable treatment to the other country. It's called FET clause, fair and equitable treatment clause. Article 5 says you can't have expropriation of my property. You can't, suppose my refinery is in India, you can't confiscate it, but I may do it indirectly. I will levy such a heavy tax that it is almost confiscation. So they say that expropriation is not permitted. These are the two main grounds. Now, the Vodafone case and the other case, the fact of going into details, if you make a retrospective law, are you violating the fair and equitable treatment clause? You come to India, you invest 20,000 crores or 40,000 crores. Now, after 6 years, 7 years, you amend the law and say, no, no, no. All your investments are not foreign investments, they're Indian investments, and I will tax them like an Indian share. Can you do that? Answer is no. Okay. So, I'll also give you a case, a very interesting case is called POSHOK versus Mongolia. Investment treaty between Mongolia and various investors in Europe, in Russia. Again, what happened was people invested in Mongolia. The gold prices shot up. They all investment in gold mines, mining of gold. Gold prices shot up, and these gold mining companies made super profits. So Mongolia imposed super profits tax. Now, interestingly, all the investing companies says, look, when we invested, tax was 10%. Now it has become 40%. It's fair and not equitable. The tribunal, the arbitration tribunal, said no, a government can increase tax. There is no guarantee that a tax will be only 10% or 15%. It can become double, treble. There is no problem. But in POSHOK versus Mongolia, they said, if they levy retrospective taxation, a different question will arise. In my humble opinion, if the amendment was prospective, there would have been no problem. It's a retrospective operation which has created unfair and inequitable treatment. And that's why the tribunal held against India. So this is investment treaty arbitration. We have signed treaties with many countries. Now, what did we do? We simply canceled those treaties. And the new model says tax will be outside arbitral tribunals. Taxation will not be allowed to be discussed. So, and the new treaty, nobody has signed. Nobody wants to sign it except one Belize, some country in West Indies, which has got some 200,000 people. So no other country has signed it. So that's a big problem in investment treaty. So with that, I have concluded my talk. If anybody wants to ask questions, please do so. I told Mr. Isani I'll speak for 30-35 minutes. I think I've substantially crossed my limit. I'm sorry if I've kept you waiting. Any questions you can ask me so that you can mind.
The first question is from me only. Can we share the slide number 6 again, sir? Pratik bhai.
Okay, sir.
Slide number 6.
On GST.
GST. Section 164, Section 3 gives the power to the government. The section says the power to make the rules conferred by this section shall include the powers to give retrospective effect to the rules or any of them from a date not earlier than the date on which the provisions of this act come into force.
Yes.
Or it is matching with the constitution, giving the effect retrospectively by giving the powers itself in the act.
Yes, it's actually by it's 164 subsection 3. It's
Yes.
the 3 is a mistake. Now, we have challenged this in the Delhi High Court and in the Karnataka High Court, whether you can have the rule making powers as retrospective effect. In some other cases, the Supreme Court has held the law is not very strong in our favor. In some other cases, the courts have held that rules can be retrospective. But here we are taking the plea that GST is a different cup of tea. It's a pass-through tax. Now, today, if you tell me in 2020 that from 2017 the tax is 18%, where will I go and pass it out? So it has got implications on Article 19(1)(g), and we have said that no guidelines have been issued for retrospective operation. So that has been challenged. According to me, it is unconstitutional, but let us wait for the High Court's view.
Now, one more provisions of the Constitution, that is 246A.
Yes.
That is a special provision with respect to Goods and Service Tax Act. Now, 246A subsection 1 says that government is of that view that there is a power to levy tax on intrastate supply. 246A(1). Now, 246A(2) says that there is a power to levy tax on interstate supply.
Yes, IGST.
Yeah, but however, 246A(2) of the Constitution says that the Parliament has exclusive power to make laws with respect to goods and services tax where the supply of goods or services or both take place in the course of interstate trade and commerce. Now, according to, my interpretation on that aspect is that the power to levy tax on supply in all cases are in 246A1 only. Now, 246A2 does not give power the parliament to levy tax on interstate supply, sir. Rather, it bars the state from levying tax on interstate supply. Because if we refer Article 269A, that's provide the apportionment of the CGST collected, 269A. So now whether the state has got the power to levy tax on interstate supply of the goods or not as per the constitution, because I think there is some anomaly.
No, I think this is very clear because Article 246A2 is something like Entry 92A. Entry 92A talks of tax on interstate trade and commerce. You see, before 1956, there was a lot of confusion which state can tax. Some state will say the sale took place here, I will tax it here. Somebody say goods delivered here, I will tax it there. Somebody says payment made there, I will tax it there. So the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution introduced Entry 92A and said, Parliament has the exclusive powers to levy tax on interstate trade. That's why you had the CST Act that declared goods concept and so on and so forth. So CST Act. So here what they did was when they have merged excise duty and sales tax, they have also said that insofar as interstate trade and commerce is concerned, it will only be the Parliament. So state government will have no power with respect to interstate trade and commerce. It will only be this. And 269A is only a question of apportionment, because 269 also was a case of earlier apportionment on sales tax. Now 269A is introduced for GST purposes.
Right. Now the one more controversy majority as far as GST is concerned, which is going on as far as our India is concerned right now, is about these fake invoices and the bogus billing activities. Now the purchaser who has purchased the goods, whereby the tax is separately charged by the seller, and he has made the payment including of the tax amount. Now subsequently, if the supplier is considered or held to be that he is not a genuine or a bogus, thereafter the department is insisting the recipient to pay the tax again, whether it will be tantamount to be a double taxation where there is no dispute about the genuineness of the transaction.
I agree with you. It can't be done because once I paid the tax and the tax is genuine, you can't ask me to pay the tax again. If that person is a fake supplier, that's a different issue. As long as I paid the tax through normal means, they can't demand tax again. We succeeded in one case in the Madras High Court. There was a circular transaction. You know, there used to be single point levy and multi-point levy in those days. So once there is a single point levy, then it can't be levied tax again. So there used to be bill discounting. I give you an invoice for steel for say 1 crore. You take that bill to the bank and you discount it. Then you again give it to a third party, again it discounts it. So then we said there was a prosecution filed saying all these bills are bogus. And yet the VAT department demanded duty. The same VAT prosecuted me, they're saying no sale took place. And here they said you pay sales tax. So we succeeded saying that once you're processing, the sales are bogus, you can't demand tax. This is a reverse situation. The sale is made, I have paid the tax. Now, how do I know that person is genuine or not? You can ask me to pay. Like, and we have got another case. I don't know if there's a case on, we had one case in Kerala which we succeeded, now the Supreme Court. This refinery in Kerala, if you sell petroleum products in Kerala, the duty is 24%. Okay, but if the same diesel goes to Lakshadweep, it is some 4% or 5%. So there would be tankers from my refinery collecting the goods and saying it's for Lakshadweep. I get a certificate from Lakshadweep saying it is for 4%. Then the department said they subsequently found out that Lakshadweep has only some 10,000 people or 50,000 people. Nobody requires so much diesel. Obviously, people were filing bogus certificates, taking the diesel and selling it in the black market. We succeeded in the Kerala High Court saying that, look, I have no control over the invoice. You show me the certificate, I take the certificate and I supply the good. Just because there's some fault with the seller's end, you can't make me pay the difference. So that we succeed for SR Oil. That's now in the Supreme Court.
It would be great if you can share some of the decisions to us later on, sir, so we can circulate to our members also.
I don't know because SR Oil, I mean, I succeeded in this case 5-6 years ago.
Sir.
That time they went to Supreme Court. I don't know what is the status now. But anyway, I'll ask them.
Sir. And the some other aspects as far as our
So
members.
the judgment of Bhagwati,
Yeah.
Polestar Electronics or something like that, where they say that once I buy the goods, I've got no control over the buyer.
Right.
If the buyer doesn't have something wrong with him, you can't make me pay.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, in GST also, sir, now there is a lot of prosecution. Yes, sir.
Tell me.
There are prosecutions, powers are also given to power to prosecute to the GST officers. Now, suppose there is a search which took place in the premises of the taxpayer, and where some bills are found that they are not of a genuine nature, or the supplier's registration certificates are cancelled, or they are having allegation that supplier has stated that they have just only issued the invoice only without supply of the goods. That is the one allegation. And because of these allegations, they are working out the tax liability, let us say, of more than 5 crore rupees, including tax, interest, and penalty. And then directly they see all the transactions are recorded in the books of accounts. Everything is there. But because their purported tax liability is more than 5 crore rupees, they have started their prosecutions and arrest of the taxpayer. How far it is in accordance with the law and as well as the constitution?
The whole difficulty is, I don't know if it has been challenged. My view is that India, unfortunately, we got a system of arrest first and trial later. The general rule is everybody is innocent till proved guilty. You file an FIR against me, I repeatedly say, don't arrest me. You can say that your charge, maybe you can say don't leave the country without permission, or you can say report to the police station once a month or something like that, once in 50 days. What's the point in arresting? What they do, they arrest you, keep you there for 90 days. After 90 days, charge sheet is not filed, you get statutory bail or you go out on bail. But then you arrest the man, and then very often, like you take 2G everything, then ultimately they found there's nothing against them. And then you, apart from the power of arrest, which has been given to officers, which I think is completely wrong, there is another danger which can be with better ground to challenge. Under Section 25 of the Evidence Act, and this law is made in 1860. A statement made to a police officer is not admissible in evidence because he can beat you and say, I committed the crime. So they said, no, you have to prove it independently. Shockingly for GST, the statement you make to the GST officer is admissible against you. Look at the paradox. If I make a statement, if I commit a murder, what I give to the police officer is not admissible. He has to prove the thing independently. But if it is a GST officer, whatever I'm forced to say to him is admissible as against me. That's the point which can be seriously challenged and struggling. Yeah. What are other questions? Anybody?
Yeah, one more thing, sir. Before the floor is open to all the members, because these are the questions which has been received during your discussion.
Please go ahead.
Please. See, exactly what are the constitutional rights of the taxpayer during the now recent search and seizure proceedings carried out by the GST officers? Because now as the search and seizure procedures are carried out in a manner that there is some search and seizure at the person's place who is like a terrorist or who is like a big evaders without having any evidence. So in that scenario, what are the such powers of these particular rights rather of the taxpayer under the constitution as well as the GST law or according to the general principles?
I'm afraid the rights are very, very poor because people have said even an illegal search will not affect the admissibility of that thing. People have said right of search and seizure. There's some safeguards that they have to, if there's a lady involved, then the women police must be there. They must search, they must make a proper search nama, they must record everything. All those safeties are there. I don't know how far they follow it in practice, we don't know. Typically they come at 6 o'clock in the morning and then for 2 days, 3 days, you are not allowed to go anywhere and so on. But there are search manuals are there, search rules are there which have to be followed. Only thing is, suppose the search rule is not followed, will it vitiate the entire proceeding? Is not, they say no, not necessarily. We got number of cases on the 132, 132A and so on, what happens to the search, etc. The Supreme Court has said that if the search is tainted, the evidence is still admissible. So as constitutional rights are concerned, what's the constitutional right? Under Article 22, you're supposed to be produced immediately before the magistrate within 24 hours, right? Krishna has said bail should be the rule, jail should be the exception. Unfortunately, in India, whether it is an actress or it's a person, first you put him in jail. If it's slightly sensational, nobody will give you bail. Remanded to custody, only High Court will give you bail. So these, unfortunately, the rights are completely flouted. Supreme Court judgments are not followed. That's the point. That's a very unfortunate situation.
Right.
And it will be counterproductive because it leads to so many other malpractices.
Yeah.
That I'll arrest you if you don't do this. That's the whole problem. But somebody has to look into it, and it's not that this has reduced the violation of law anymore. In fact, this has made the law worse. Make the law worse. I say that you file an FIR, file a charge, you don't arrest him. Let the law take its own course. You have a fast track court, you have a special court if you like SEBI has got a special court, have a special court, it's okay. But there's no need to arrest.
Right. One more last question for the income tax side. In income tax, nowadays the CBDT has issued one instruction, rather the direction, to make a 20% of the payment in the case of demand raised in the assessment order to get the stay. There will be automatic stay after making the payment of 20% or more than the 20%. Now, this is only something like a directory or the instructions in a nature. Now, the officers are following it is a mandatory that everybody has to pay 20%, whether the assessment are framed under the high pitch assessment scheme or whatever. Now, how far the constitutional rights of the taxpayers are violating in such type of the instructions which has been issued by the CBDT and blindly followed by the assessing officer?
The Supreme Court has said, Justice Nariman's judgment is there, that 20% is not mandatory, it's directory.
Yes.
I have yet to come across one case where they have put less than 20%.
Yes.
Yet to come across one case. I don't know if somebody in Gujarat, they've got some officers who are putting less than, not one case I have at least come across.
You are right, sir.
Now this question of, see, according to me, the entire income tax system is flawed. In income tax, the assessing officer imposes tax. You go to you file an appeal, but the stay is given by the jurisdictional commission under section 220. According to me, the stay should be given by the appellate commissioner. He should decide what is the prima facie case. Suppose it is completely, the judgment is in your favor, then why should you pay any tax? If its judgment is completely against you, pay more tax. If your appeal is frivolous, he pays more. But here what happens, everywhere across the board, it is 20%. Now look at the paradox. Excise had a wonderful amendment. Excise had an amendment which said that it will be 7.5% or 10 crores maximum. That worked very well. So even if the demand is 700 crores, 800 crores, it is 7.5% or 10, whichever is higher. Otherwise, what used to happen is we used to spend 1 or 2 days arguing the stay application, which is like a final hearing. Then against the stay order, they'll say pay 30%, pay 40%, one more wrong to the High Court. Then High Court will remand it back. I thought that they can say for all taxes, either pay 7.5%, maximum 10 crores and finish off. It will be very, very salutary, number one. The new income tax amendment is worse. It is 20% of tax plus interest plus penalty, which is going to lead to huge problems. And again, what they do, since this 20%, if your tax is 100, they will demand 500 rupees and say pay 20% of 500. It's a system which is completely abused, unfortunately. And you only go to court and there is no other hope.
So now the two questions we have received in the chat box.
Yeah.
Number one is whether Article 246A carves over all powers related to GST, including the powers to arrest, or is it limited to grant only power to levy GST and incidental matters, but not arrest and prosecutions?
First answer is the Supreme Court has very clearly held that the power to, there's a not only Supreme Court, Mysore High Court at that time and Madras High Court has very clearly held that the power to enact a law includes the right to prescribe penal provisions for violation of the law. So if I have got power to levy sales tax, I can have provisions which give provision for penalty, prosecution, all that is there. So 246A will cover everything.
And the second question is, sir, what is your view on taxpayers' right? With India legislating taxpayers' right, do you think Vodafone kind of retrospective amendments can be challenged as violating taxpayers' rights?
See, this taxpayers charter, etc. If you see the previous edition of Kanga and Paltiwala, from 2005-6, every finance minister says it's not adversarial. We should have tax friendly. We should be where these are our own citizens. We treat them well, but we know in reality it doesn't happen. And frankly, if you ask me, in a sense, I can't blame the tax officer. If you have absurd revenue targets, what does the man do? And I think after 40 years plus of practice, the fundamental problem is the imposition of absurd revenue targets. The entire source of the problem comes from there. You start making demands which are totally unsustainable. You simply say, I'm making the demand, let him go to appeal. His luck, if he gets some relief, he gets some relief. But once you abolish revenue targets, my humble opinion is at least 75% of this problem of exaggerated demands all will disappear. Secondly, you are talking of taxpayers' rights. Has any officer been questioned for disobeying a Supreme Court judgment? Despite a Supreme Court judgment, despite a High Court judgment of that same state, we have demands made contrary to that. But no action is taken. In fact, you have instructions given that to an appellate commissioner that your CR, your promotion will depend on how much tax or how much enhancements you do. If this is the thing which was frowned upon by the Bombay High Court, then we are into very serious trouble. So all this taxpayer right will only be in theory. There are no taxpayer rights at all in reality. It's like fundamental duties in the Constitution. Be a good man, respect the Constitution. It's all advice to students. Study hard, work hard, etc. It doesn't work.
Now, there are 2-3 aspects. See, sir, as far as the members or the participants are concerned, they are into the day-to-day practice of income tax and taxation. So some of the questions are related to their practice or the difficulties faced by them. The major question is about the late fees in the Constitution. Earlier, when we were filing the return late, then at that time the penalty word was there. Now the government has very smartly changed the word from penalty to late fees. Because whenever there is a penalty, then you will have to give an opportunity of hearing or some chance maybe please given to that particular taxpayer before imposing the penalty. Now the word is late fee and it has been constitutionally held valid also. So whether the late fee is in Constitution or it is constitutionally valid or not?
No, it is valid. It is absolutely valid. And in a lighter vein, if it's called late fee, it's better because you can get it allowed under Section 37 of Income Tax Act. It's not a penalty, so you'll get it as you'll get it allowed. There's nothing. But it's not unconstitutional. It's perfectly valid.
Right. Varishji, I have a question, sir.
Yes, please go.
Sir, there is one question with regard to compensation cess. You told that GST is the only tax in the concurrent list, and you also
no. I said GST is the only tax which is levied both by center and state.
Yes. And you also told that till date the states have acted responsibly in the sense that nobody is going out of the way from the recommendations of the GST Council. But do you foresee a situation where X state starts imposing the SGST component of GST on a higher rate if the state central is not compensating to the extent which is asked for? Number one. I am asking this more particularly because this compensation cess has a limit or a limitation of 5 years. It is not infinite. So there can come a situation we had seen in the past also that one state goes out of the way and imposes, gives an incentive or a disincentive if the dealer acts in a certain way. And that would defeat the whole purpose of the GST, sir. Need your thoughts about that.
Yes. See, I will not get into GST compensation cess because when I studied the matter, what I was told by my friends was there was an express promise made by Mr. Jaitley that don't worry, we will assume a 14% year-on-year growth. Now just imagine if you're going to assume 14% growth of tax, you're assuming the economy is also going to boom by more than 14% because if tax is going to go up by 14%, sales are going to go up by more, even at the age of 14%. No country grows at 14% growth per year. No country has got a GDP growth of 14%. That was a promise made. Now, unfortunately, the matter became very, very severe. They could not pay the money. I think they should pay at any cost. To answer your question, what the states have been doing is they are not changing the GST rate. They are increasing the diesel tax, petrol tax, because under the Constitution, the states have got the right to tax liquor and petroleum products. So when there's a shortfall, they increase the diesel tax, etc., and that's how they make up the money. But technically speaking, there is nothing in the constitution which prevents one state from saying, I will make an extra amount, I'll levy something else. Because Article 246 says both Parliament and states can levy GST. Parliament and states can levy GST. And the GST Council is recommendatory. Suppose one state says, I don't want to follow you, what will you do?
True. True.
Technically, of course, there could be consequences, but that's a big problem. As you say, beyond a point, if a state government is forced to the corner, there is a possibility of the whole thing breaking up. Fortunately, it has not happened till now.
True.
Of course, so one party says if they come back to power, they'll abolish GST. So we don't know what will happen.
True, sir. Sir, Varishji, one more, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I only stated in my welcome address that you highlighted or you flagged some issues, that there might be some issues in implementation of GST. Sir, if you can tell me what were the glaring issues which were visible to you at that time, which enabled you to make up your mind that this wouldn't be a act which would be implemented flawlessly, number one. And do you think that the changes which are being made in the last 3 years, can the situation be salvaged at this stage or not, sir?
Yes. As I said, when I was giving addresses in seminars and so on, I said India is a country of 1.2 billion people. We are not like Canada with 14 million people or some small state. That's one point. So, and I said we are like almost 22 different nations. Jharkhand is different, Chhattisgarh is different, Gujarat is a prosperous state, you are different. So to have one type of tax for all will be difficult. That's point number one. Secondly, I said that if you want a GST, then you must have a full-fledged GST. All input credits and preferably only 1 or 2 rates of tax. Either have 5% or 0% for essential commodities and a flat 12% tax. I said if you have multiple GST, it is bound to fail because you're going to have a lot of tax evasion, same problem. Like if you say ready-made shirt less than 1,000 rupees, so much, more than 1,000 rupees, so much. A real estate, we've still not got all the socialist mindset, that if it's a small flat, lesser tax, bigger flat, that's not how the world works. The whole world has moved on. You go to Singapore, you go to any country, 7%, whether you buy a gold necklace or you buy some 10 lakh watch or you buy a small bottle of soft drink, the tax is the same. I personally feel that in GST, you should have only 2 rates of tax and then allow all the input credits. If that is there, you'll actually collect much, much more. I don't know if all of you know how this 28% first came, because sales tax was 12%, excise duty was 16%. They said 12 plus 16 is 28. So it became the RNR, revenue neutral rate. But 28% in a country like India, there's bound to be cheating. Nobody is going to get into that. So the way to salvage GST is, one, have 2 rates of tax. Second point, cut off all the exemptions. Don't have less than 1,000 square feet, more than 1,000 square feet, eliminate that. Thirdly, have a really independent mechanism. Today you got an AAR where 80% cases are against the SSC. So we know going to AAR, we're going to lose. It's like a match fixing. From the beginning, you know the game is against you and you only hope to get some success in the thing. Why are you doing this? What is wrong in having an AAR or an independent tribunal which can decide the matter? Doesn't matter. See, in investment treaty arbitration, there are 32 major cases on tax. 16 are in favor of the government and 15 are in favor of the SSC. 31 cases, 16. So it's not that it's going to be completely in favor of the SSC. So you must have an independent mechanism. Even today, there is no tribunal. And I don't know if this GST system with so much of electronics and thing is suitable for India. But within GST, just keep 2 rates of tax, have an independent appellate mechanism, and quite a lot of problems will be solved. And don't have this, deposit 50% for appeal and all that. And leave it to that thing. Keep a nominal appeal, make an appeal meaningful.
Yes, Varishji, sir.
Yes.
Next, another question is whether penal provisions under both CGST Act and SGST Act for a single offence suffers from the voice of double jeopardy prohibited under Article 20.
No, because you're not going to be punished 1 year under CGST and 1 year under SGST. It's going to be a joint prosecution and yeah. Next.
Article 366 into bracket 29A of the Constitution has still not been deleted from the Constitution even after introduction of GST. There are certain inconsistency between Schedule 2 of GST and Article 246. How do you see this?
Yes. No, there is definitely a problem. Please, 26629A continues because it was a question of deemed sales, works contract, and so on and so forth. So the principles of 26629A will continue. Now, if you're going to levy, the GST is going to be on different aspects of. Actually, 360, the importance has definitely come down. What the person asking the question is right, because sales tax is virtually gone except for some petroleum products and alcohol, which again is mostly within the state. There's very little interstate movement. But there's no need to delete 36629A. As long as it continues, it continues. What will happen is the section will become not usable, like Article 363. It's on privy purses. The article is still there, but the privy purses is gone. But there's some use, but still it was useful in the Padmanabha Swami temple case. We don't know, so let it continue. It is not. It need not be deleted. Now I don't know what inconsistencies is talking about. I have a issue on Schedule 2 and 246. Suppose a 99-year lease is there. In most of the GIDC, MIDC, etc., they give you a land on 99-year lease. Okay, what they charge you is virtually the cost of land. At least in Tamil Nadu, if I take a 10-acre plot to set up an industry, I pay upfront lease premium. I get 99-year lease. I pay upfront lease, which is equal to the value of the land, and I pay 1 rupee rent for 50 years, or I pay 1 rupee for 49 years, and 2 rupees for the next 50 years. So it's almost like a sale. Now, recently the AR said, no, this is liable to GST. Now, if I'm going to pay stamp duty on that 99-year amount, and again going to pay GST on that, how will you run business? I don't know what brains they've got. They can simply say any long-term lease will be examined if it's given by the government industrial corporation. Save it. Now, again, this is being opening up. Everybody who's gone into this has a problem. Very often, no company goes for 99 years. After 49 years, there could be a merger, could be an amalgamation. I may shift it to some other company. These are all transactions of land should be outside GST. Then again, like for example, in lotteries, all are levying tax on the gross amount, not on the commission. That's another major problem. You see, what we have got is, I've got a transaction, how to levy the maximum tax. I don't care about the law. I will make the demand at 18% or 28%. Usko jane do, let him go to tribunal, appeal, let him go. That is the unfortunate part. A lot of inconsistencies. Yeah.
Next is Judge Bench in anti-tax case has stated that each state is independent in their taxation. Right, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has said states are not appendage of the center. In light of this, can a state independently exercise their taxation rights irrespective of the recommendations of the GST Council?
See, actually, if you read the article literally, yes, because the GST Council only recommendatory powers. And there is under Article 279, I think clause 11, there is a dispute resolution mechanism. There is still no mechanism in place. But to answer your question, there is nothing with the constitution prevents the state from going on its own.
Right. The next and the last is in the chat box is 36692 says transfer of right to use is a supply of goods. Schedule 2 says it is a deemed service. Isn't there an inconsistency?
No, it's just a legal fiction. It's like saying Vodafone says a foreign share is an Indian share. This is more like a transfer of right. This is, yes, it's a deemed. Parliament can create a legal fiction. It can do something which is not correct.
Right. I think now entire questions has been dealt by the learned speaker, sir. Anything is left, sir?
Varishi, I have a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, we had a brief talk about AAR. Now, sir, you would have seen that the constitution of AAR, it is headed by a joint commissioner of SGST and CGST. With all due respect to the joint commissioners, they are bound to be pro-revenue. So the whole purpose of getting an advance ruling is defeated in that sense. Can this particular aspect be challenged, or the judiciary would say that this is absolutely a domain of the legislature and we won't interfere into the same?
I think they will say it's a domain of legislature. Because, see, for example, Commissioner of Central Excise, say for example, if you take Central Excise Section 11A, a demand is made for 5 years. Commissioner decides. issue show cause notice, invariably it is confirmed. In fact, to tell you in a lighter vein, in the 90s, I'm talking of something 25, 30 years ago. I was appearing before a commissioner of central excise in Bangalore. So while arguing the case, he said that Mr. Datar, how do you find the difference between practicing in court and practicing? He's a nice man. What's the difference between practicing in court and practicing in the before me? So I told him jokingly, sir, before you, it's a completely tension-free practice. He said, why do you say so? I said, I know I'm going to lose. In the court, there is tension because I may win, I may lose. But before you, I know the demand is going to be against me. So there is no question. I'm just going to make my submission. You make the demand, I'll go to the tribunal. So that is the point. So what the government doesn't realize is by having such an AR, it's counterproductive. You are now dealing with GST of 28 states. Just imagine if you got independent, like the ITAT, you got an independent tribal AR. You develop so much respect. SSC will have confidence. There's a rule of law. If you're making a wrong demand, I will go to the tribunal, I'll get a success. And if you go to triple, the appellate authority, that's also bureaucratic. In your AR, the appeal is also to only a bureaucratic setup, not to an independent tribunal.
True, true.
But you can't challenge it, unfortunately.
Yeah, Varishji.
Only, sir, if you want to ask any questions, sir.
No.
Friends, it was really indeed a wonderful
I
presentation.
only hope I did not take too much time and make the audience bored. That's all I hope.
No, sir.
Very
We
sure,
really enjoyed thoroughly. In fact, our as far as the constitutional or other aspect is concerned, our speaker is absolutely, no one can beat him and he is incomparable. But no one can beat him in Antakshari also. He is very good in Antakshari also. Yes. And he's also very fond of traveling. He always travel in the summer vacation and during the vacation of Dasera also. And this Dasera is now going to be celebrated very soon. And we wish, sir, this after this COVID-19 pandemic, you will have again a small vacation during the Dashera with Hemani ji, the wife of our speaker.
Incidentally, she's from Baroda, so I used to come to work Gujarat very often.
Yes.
Oh, very good, sir. So you're most welcome to Ahmedabad, sir. Be our guest in Ahmedabad also, sir. Most
I
welcome.
used to come to Baroda till 96. Every year I used to come to Baroda. So anyway.
Right, sir.
Yes, sir.
Whenever you visit, sir, Baroda, you are most welcome. Be a guest of our house.
I really enjoyed my stay there, especially the hospitality and
Right, sir. Right, sir. Now over to Sunil Bhai for the further and the concluding proceedings as far as the official vote of thanks is concerned.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. And it was very resourceful deliberation as we always thought out it would be. I would request Pratik Bhai Patel, the Honorary Secretary of Tax Advocate Association, to propose the official vote of thanks and conclude this session, sir. Pratik Bhai, sir.
Thank you, sir. Hello and good evening, friends. At the outset, firstly, I would like to thank Sri Sunil Bhai Keshwani, President of the Tax Advocate Association, Gujarat, Sri P.K. Soni, sir, President of Gujarat Celtex Bar Association, Convener Sri Varis Isani ji, for giving me opportunity to propose vote of thanks. The eminent speaker of the day, Mr. Arvind Datar ji, the Senior Advocate of Supreme Court, for giving his talk on overview of constitutional aspects and taxation. I would extend our deep sense of gratitude toward the speaker for sharing their knowledge on the topic which concern all of us. Lastly, I would like to appreciate and acknowledge the strength and support provided by all delegates present here and make our webinar successful. Thank you very much.
one second. One person has asked a question. Is Maxwell a good book for interpretation? One question. Please, I will tell all of you, please purchase GP Singh's interpretation of statute. It is the best book on interpretation according to me. GP Singh, interpretation of statutes. Don't go to Maxwell, go to GP Singh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you,
Datar.
sir. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure, sir.
Nice meeting and
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we'll close the session,
Happy
sir.
Dasara, happy Diwali to all of you.
Thank
Same
you,
to
thank
you,
you.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pratik Bhai, if you can close the session, sir.
Okay, sir.